The impact of the shushing incident became clear to Mike Tindall within hours of the balcony appearance ending. Palace staff began showing family members some of the early social media reactions, and it was obvious that Prince Louis's interaction with Mike had captured the public imagination in a way that none of them had anticipated. The video clips and photographs were spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at an unprecedented rate. People from around the world were sharing the content with comments about how refreshing it was to see such genuine, unguarded moments during formal royal events. Many parents were relating to the situation, sharing their own stories of children behaving unpredictably in important situations. Mike's phone began buzzing with messages from friends and former teammates who had seen the coverage. Rugby players who had faced him on the field were now sending laughing emojis and jokes about how he had finally met his match in 4-year-old Prince Louis. The good-natured ribbing was exactly what Mike had expected from his sporting colleagues. Media outlets were scrambling to get reaction quotes from body language experts, child development specialists, and royal commentators. The consensus was overwhelmingly positive, with experts praising both Louis's natural behavior and Mike's instinctive response. Child psychologists noted how Mike's patient reaction had helped Louis feel validated and supported rather than corrected or embarrassed. The Palace communications team was monitoring the coverage carefully, but they quickly realized that this was the kind of positive attention that money couldn't buy. The authentic moment had humanized the royal family in a way that carefully planned public relations campaigns rarely achieved. The image of a small prince confidently shushing a former international rugby player perfectly captured the blend of formality and family warmth that characterized the modern monarchy. Prince William and Catherine were receiving updates throughout the evening about how the story was developing in the media. Both parents were pleased that the coverage was focusing on the positive aspects of Louis's behavior rather than criticizing him for being inappropriate during a formal occasion. They had always tried to allow their children to express themselves naturally while teaching them about their responsibilities as members of the royal family. The Queen was briefed about the media reaction during her evening routine. Her response, according to those present, was characteristically measured but positive. She had always believed that the public's affection for the royal family was strengthened by moments that showed their humanity, and Louis's interaction with Mike certainly qualified as one of those moments. By the following morning, the story had been picked up by international news outlets. Television morning shows around the world were featuring the clip as a feel-good story, often playing it multiple times during their broadcasts. News anchors couldn't help but smile when introducing the segment, and many shared their own experiences of being shushed by young children. Mike woke up to find himself trending on Twitter, something he had never experienced during his rugby career. The hashtag #MikeTindallShushed was being used by people sharing the video along with their own commentary. Most of the reaction was positive and humorous, with people praising his patient response to Prince Louis's directive. Parenting bloggers and family websites began writing articles about the incident, using it as an example of how adults should respond when children express themselves authentically. Mike's reaction was being held up as a model of patience and understanding, showing how to validate a child's feelings without making them feel embarrassed or wrong. The story took on additional dimensions as people began sharing it in contexts beyond just royal family news. Sports websites were covering it from the angle of a tough rugby player being bossed around by a toddler. Comedy shows were incorporating the moment into their routines. Even serious news programs were using it as a lighter story to end their broadcasts. Mike found himself being interviewed by rugby journalists who wanted to know how it felt to be on the receiving end of such a direct command from royalty. His responses were characteristically humble and good-natured, emphasizing that Louis was just being a normal 4-year-old trying to cope with an overwhelming situation. He consistently deflected attempts to make the story about himself, instead focusing on how well Louis had handled such a complex public event. The incident also sparked discussions about the pressures faced by royal children during public appearances. Many commentators noted how difficult it must be for young children to maintain composure during lengthy, formal events, and they praised the royal family for allowing Louis to express himself naturally rather than forcing him to conform to adult expectations of behavior. Child development experts began appearing on television programs to discuss the psychological aspects of the interaction. They explained how Mike's response had been perfect from a developmental standpoint, showing Lewis that his feelings were valid while helping him feel supported rather than corrected. The incident was being used as a teaching tool for parents and caregivers about how to respond to children in challenging situations. The merchandising opportunities didn't take long to emerge. T-shirt companies began producing shirts with slogans like "Shushed by Royalty" and "Team Lewis." Meme creators were having a field day, creating countless variations on the theme of Prince Louis as the ultimate authority figure. While the royal family doesn't typically endorse commercial products related to their image, the organic nature of the merchandise seemed to amuse rather than concern them. Social media influencers and content creators began making their own videos inspired by the incident. Parents were sharing clips of their own children shushing adults in various situations. The hashtag became a way for people to celebrate the honesty and directness that children bring to adult situations. Mike's former England rugby teammates were having particular fun with the story. Several of them gave interviews where they joked about how they had tried for years to shut Mike up during team meetings, but it had taken a 4-year-old prince to finally succeed. The good-natured teasing was exactly the kind of response Mike had expected from the rugby community. The incident also highlighted the unique position that Mike occupied within the royal family. As someone who had come to royalty through marriage rather than birth, and who had achieved fame through sport rather than heredity, he represented a different kind of royal family member. His natural, unpretentious response to Louis's behavior resonated with people who saw him as more relatable than traditional royals. International media coverage began focusing on how the incident reflected changes in the modern British monarchy. Royal commentators noted that previous generations of royals might have handled such a situation differently, perhaps with more emphasis on correcting the child's behavior to maintain dignity. Mike's response was seen as representative of a more relaxed, family-oriented approach to royal protocol. The story continued to generate positive coverage for weeks after the event. Anniversary articles about the Platinum Jubilee consistently featured the shushing moment as one of the highlights. It became one of those cultural moments that people remembered long after the specific details of the event had faded. Mike eventually did several extended interviews about the experience, always emphasizing how normal and natural Louis's behavior had been for a child his age. He spoke about his own experiences as a father and how that had informed his response to the situation. The interviews revealed his genuine affection for Louis and his understanding of the challenges facing royal children. The long-term impact of the incident extended beyond just entertainment value. Child advocacy organizations began using the video in their educational materials about appropriate adult responses to children's emotional expressions. The moment had become an example of how to support children while allowing them to maintain their authenticity. Years later, the incident remained one of the most beloved moments from Queen Elizabeth II's Platinum Jubilee celebration. It had perfectly captured the balance between tradition and modernity that characterized her reign, showing how the royal family could maintain their dignity while still allowing space for genuine human moments. For Mike Tindall, the experience became a defining moment in his public life. While he had been known primarily as a successful rugby player who married into the royal family, the shushing incident showed the world his character as a patient, understanding family member who could handle unexpected situations with grace and humor. The story ultimately became more than just a funny anecdote about a royal event. It represented the kind of authentic, human moments that connect people across cultural and social boundaries. The image of a small prince confidently directing a large rugby player to be quiet had touched something universal about childhood, family relationships, and the importance of treating children with respect and understanding. Prince Louis, meanwhile, continued to grow and develop, likely unaware of how his spontaneous gesture had brought joy to millions of people around the world. The incident had captured him at a perfect moment in his development, showing the confidence and authenticity that would hopefully serve him well as he continued to navigate his unique position in the world. The story of Mike Tindall being shushed by Prince Louis became one of those rare moments when everything aligned perfectly: the right people, the right situation, the right response, and the right audience. It reminded everyone watching that beneath all the ceremony and protocol, the royal family were still people dealing with the same challenges and joys that families everywhere experience, just on a much more public stage. The moment that would define the entire day began innocently enough. Prince Louis had been covering and uncovering his ears as the aircraft thundered overhead, his face cycling through expressions of wonder and mild overwhelm. Mike Tindall, standing nearby, was keeping a watchful eye on all the children while trying to enjoy the spectacular flypast himself. What happened next caught everyone off guard. As the noise from the jet engines reached its peak, Prince Louis decided he had heard enough. In a move that would soon be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, the 4-year-old prince looked directly at Mike Tindall and very deliberately told him to be quiet. The gesture was unmistakable. Louis placed his finger to his lips in the universal shush motion and directed it specifically at Mike. The former rugby captain, who had faced down some of the toughest players in international rugby, found himself being told to pipe down by a member of the royal family who wasn't even tall enough to reach his waist. Mike's initial reaction was one of surprise mixed with amusement. In all his years of being part of the extended royal family, he had never experienced anything quite like this. The formality of royal occasions usually meant that interactions between family members were carefully measured and appropriate to the setting. But 4-year-old Prince Louis clearly had his own ideas about appropriate behavior. The beauty of the moment lay in its complete spontaneity. Louis wasn't trying to be funny or disrespectful. From his perspective, there was simply too much noise happening around him, and the logical solution was to ask the nearest adult to help reduce the volume. The fact that the adult in question was a former international rugby player who had no control over the sound of RAF jets flying overhead was irrelevant to the little prince's reasoning. Mike's response to being shushed by Prince Louis would later be praised by parenting experts and child development specialists around the world. Instead of being offended or trying to correct the child's behavior, Mike simply smiled and nodded in acknowledgement. He understood instinctively that this was not a moment for adult dignity or protocol, but rather an opportunity to connect with a child who was doing his best to cope with an overwhelming situation. The interaction lasted only a few seconds, but it was captured by dozens of cameras positioned around the balcony. Photographers who had been focused on getting the perfect shot of the Queen and the flypast suddenly realized they had witnessed something much more valuable, a genuine, unscripted moment that perfectly captured the humanity within the royal family. Catherine, Prince William's wife, had been watching the exchange from nearby and couldn't help but smile at her youngest son's bold move. As a mother, she understood that Louis was simply trying to make sense of a situation that was far outside his normal experience. The fact that he had chosen to engage with Mike Tindall in his quest for quieter surroundings showed the level of trust and familiarity that existed within the extended royal family. Prince William, meanwhile, was caught between parental pride and mild embarrassment. On one hand, he was pleased that Louis felt comfortable enough to express himself authentically during such a formal occasion. On the other hand, he was acutely aware that every gesture made by his children would be scrutinized and analyzed by media outlets around the world. The flypast continued overhead, but many of the adults on the balcony found their attention divided between the aerial display and the ongoing reactions of Prince Louis. The little boy seemed to have decided that Mike Tindall was now his partner in managing the noise levels around them, and he continued to direct various gestures and expressions in Mike's direction. Mike found himself in the unique position of being the designated recipient of Prince Louis's running commentary on the proceedings. Through a combination of facial expressions, hand gestures, and the occasional whispered comment, Louis was essentially providing his own 4-year-old's perspective on the Platinum Jubilee celebration. The former rugby captain had dealt with pressure situations throughout his sporting career, but nothing had quite prepared him for becoming the focus of a royal 4-year-old's attention during one of the most photographed events of the year. He handled the situation with the same calm competence that had made him successful on the rugby field, treating Louis's interactions with the seriousness they deserved while maintaining his own composure. As the aircraft formation reached its climax overhead, Louis's reactions became even more animated. He continued to use Mike as his point of reference, Looking to the older man for guidance on how to respond to each new wave of sound and spectacle, Mike found himself nodding along with Lewis's observations, creating a silent conversation that was both touching and hilarious to witness. The Queen, despite being the center of attention for the massive crowd below, was well aware of the interaction taking place between her great-grandson and Mike Tindall. Her expression suggested that she found the whole exchange rather charming, and those who knew her well could detect the subtle signs of amusement that indicated her approval of how the situation was being handled. Prince Charles, soon to be King Charles III, was also observing the interaction with interest. As someone who had raised children in the public eye and understood the challenges of maintaining dignity while allowing young family members to express themselves naturally, he appreciated Mike's patient and understanding response to Lewis's overtures. The photographers and videographers capturing the event quickly realized that they were witnessing something special. The images of Prince Louis shushing Mike Tindall would soon become some of the most shared and beloved content from the entire Platinum Jubilee celebration. The moment perfectly encapsulated the joy and spontaneity that children bring to even the most formal occasions. As the flypast began to wind down, Louis seemed to relax slightly, though he maintained his connection with Mike throughout the remainder of the balcony appearance. The little prince had apparently decided that Mike was now his designated ally in navigating the complexities of royal protocol, and he continued to seek reassurance and acknowledgement from the former rugby player. Mike's handling of the situation would later be analyzed by child development experts who praised his instinctive understanding of how to respond to a young child's needs in a high-pressure situation. By treating Lewis's gestures with respect and seriousness, Mike had validated the little boy's feelings while helping him feel more comfortable in an overwhelming environment. The crowd below had been largely unaware of the specific interactions taking place on the balcony, but those with binoculars or telephoto lenses had caught glimpses of the exchange between Mike and Louis. Social media posts began appearing almost immediately, with people sharing photos and videos of the young prince's animated reactions and Mike's patient responses. As the official balcony appearance drew to a close, the royal family began to wave their final acknowledgments to the crowd before retreating back into the palace. Prince Louis, who had started the event as an overwhelmed 4-year-old, now seemed much more comfortable and confident, largely due to the supportive presence of Mike Tindall beside him. The walk back through the palace corridors was filled with laughter and conversation as family members discussed the success of the event. Several people commented on Lewis's performance, with unanimous agreement that his authentic reactions had added a wonderful human element to the formal proceedings. Mike found himself receiving congratulations from other family members for his handling of the Louis situation. Prince William approached him specifically to thank him for being so patient and understanding with his son. The future king explained that Louis had been particularly excited about the day but had also been somewhat anxious about being in front of such a large crowd. Catherine also expressed her gratitude to Mike for helping Louis feel more comfortable during the balcony appearance. As a mother, she understood how important it was for children to have supportive adults around them during potentially overwhelming situations. Mike's natural response had helped turn what could have been a stressful experience for Louis into something much more positive. The Queen herself took a moment to acknowledge Mike's role in the day's success. In her characteristically understated way, she expressed appreciation for how he had handled the situation with Louis. Coming from someone who had spent decades managing public appearances with young family members, this recognition carried particular weight. As the immediate family members retired to private quarters to rest before the evening's festivities, Mike reflected on the unexpected turn his day had taken. He had come to the Platinum Jubilee celebration expecting to fulfill his usual role as a supportive family member, but had ended up becoming an integral part of one of the event's most memorable moments. The interaction with Prince Louis had reminded Mike of his own children and the importance of meeting young people where they are, rather than expecting them to immediately conform to adult expectations. The little prince's boldness in engaging with him had been both charming and instructive, showing how children can navigate complex situations when they feel supported and understood. Unknown to Mike at the time, The images and videos of his interaction with Prince Louis were already beginning to spread across the internet. Social media users were sharing the content with captions praising both Louis's authenticity and Mike's patient response. The moment was being hailed as a perfect example of how the modern royal family could balance tradition with genuine human connection. Mike Tindall stood on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, watching the crowds below wave their flags with enthusiasm. The Platinum Jubilee celebrations were in full swing, and thousands of people had gathered on the Mall to celebrate Queen Elizabeth II's 70 years on the throne. As a former England rugby captain, Mike had attended many formal events, but nothing quite compared to the spectacle of a royal celebration. The morning had started early for the Tindall family. Zara had been rushing around their Gackham Park home, making sure their 3 children were properly dressed for the occasion. Mike had learned long ago that when it came to royal events, everything had to be perfect. One wrong move, one inappropriate outfit, or one moment of poor behavior could end up on the front pages of newspapers around the world. Their eldest daughter, Mia, now 8 years old, understood the importance of these gatherings. She had been to enough royal functions to know that she needed to stand still, smile when appropriate, and keep her voice down. Their younger daughter, Lena, at 3 years old, was still learning the ropes, but generally followed her sister's lead. Mike often marveled at how quickly children adapted to the formal atmosphere of royal life. The drive to Buckingham Palace had been filled with the usual pre-event chatter. Zara reviewed the schedule with the children, explaining who would be there and what would happen during the day. Mike listened with half an ear, his mind already focused on the logistics of managing 3 young children during what would likely be a very long day. As they arrived at the palace, Mike couldn't help but notice the increased security presence. The Metropolitan Police had cordoned off large sections of central London, and armed officers were positioned at regular intervals along the route. The scale of the operation reminded him of major sporting events, but with an added layer of formality and protocol that only the royal family could command. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was buzzing with activity. Palace staff moved efficiently through the corridors, making final preparations for the day's events. Members of the extended royal family were gathering in various reception rooms, and Mike could hear the familiar sounds of children's voices echoing through the grand hallways. Prince William and Catherine had arrived with their 3 children, Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and 4-year-old Prince Louis. Mike had watched Louis grow from a baby into a spirited little boy who seemed to have inherited his father's mischievous streak. The youngest Cambridge child had already gained a reputation for his animated expressions and spontaneous reactions during public appearances. The balcony appearance was scheduled for later in the day, after the Trooping the Color ceremony and the RAF flypast. But even during the quiet moments before the main events, Mike could sense that Louis was in one of his more energetic moods. The little prince was bouncing between different family members, asking questions about everything he could see, and generally displaying the kind of unbridled curiosity that made 4-year-olds both delightful and challenging to manage in formal settings. Queen Elizabeth II, despite her advanced age, seemed to draw energy from the presence of her great-grandchildren. Mike had always been impressed by how she could command respect from world leaders while simultaneously getting down on the floor to play with the youngest members of her family. Today, she was clearly enjoying the chaos that came with having multiple young children in the palace. As the morning progressed, the family gathered for a light lunch before the main events began. The dining room was filled with conversation as adults caught up on family news while keeping one eye on the children. Mike found himself seated near Prince William, and the 2 men discussed everything from rugby to parenting challenges. William confided that Louis had been particularly excited about the day's events, especially the prospect of seeing the planes fly overhead. The little boy had been talking about the flypast for weeks, and his enthusiasm was infectious. However, William also admitted that Louis's excitement sometimes manifested in unexpected ways, and they were all prepared for whatever surprises the day might bring. After lunch, it was time to prepare for the balcony appearance. Palace staff began organizing the family members according to a carefully planned arrangement that would ensure everyone was visible to the crowds below while maintaining proper protocol. Mike had learned that these seemingly simple moments actually required extensive planning and coordination. The walk through the palace corridors toward the balcony felt different from previous occasions. There was an electricity in the air, perhaps because everyone knew this might be one of the last major celebrations that the Queen would be able to enjoy in full health. The weight of history seemed to hang over every step they took. As they approached the famous balcony doors, Mike could hear the roar of the crowd outside. The sound was unlike anything else he had experienced, even during his rugby career when he had played in front of passionate crowds at Twickenham. This was deeper, more sustained, and filled with genuine affection for the woman they had come to celebrate. The doors opened, and the family began to step out onto the balcony in the predetermined order. Mike watched as Queen Elizabeth II emerged first, followed by the senior members of the royal family. The crowd's cheers reached a crescendo as people caught sight of the monarch, their voices carrying across the expanse of the mall. Prince Louis appeared on the balcony with barely contained excitement. His eyes were wide as he took in the sea of people below, and Mike could see the little boy's mind working to process the magnitude of what he was witnessing. The crowd responded enthusiastically to the sight of the Cambridge children, with many people waving specifically in their direction. As the family settled into their positions along the balcony railing, Mike positioned himself where he could keep an eye on all the children while still maintaining the dignity required for such a formal occasion. He had learned from experience that royal events required a delicate balance between allowing children to be children while ensuring they understood the importance of the moment. The first few minutes passed smoothly. Everyone waved to the crowd, smiled for the photographers, and generally fulfilled their roles in the carefully choreographed appearance. Prince George stood quietly next to his grandfather, Prince Charles, while Princess Charlotte waved enthusiastically to the people below. Prince Louis, meanwhile, was taking everything in with the wide-eyed wonder that only a 4-year-old could display. Mike noticed that Louis seemed particularly fascinated by the crowd's response to his presence. Every time the little boy waved, the crowd would cheer louder, and Mike could see the wheels turning in Louis's head as he began to understand the power of his actions. This was the moment when Mike realized that the day might be about to take an interesting turn. The RAF flypast was approaching, and palace officials had briefed everyone on what to expect. The aircraft would appear from the east, fly over the palace in a carefully coordinated formation, and disappear toward the west. The timing had been planned down to the second, and everyone on the balcony was prepared to look up and wave as the planes passed overhead. As the first sounds of aircraft engines reached the palace, Mike could see Louis's excitement building. The little boy was practically vibrating with anticipation, and Mike found himself moving slightly closer to ensure he could intervene if necessary. He had no specific concerns, but his parenting instincts told him that Louis was reaching a point where his enthusiasm might overflow in unpredictable ways. The aircraft appeared on schedule, flying in perfect formation against the clear blue sky. The crowd below erupted in cheers, and everyone on the balcony began waving and pointing at the impressive display above them. Mike watched as Louis craned his neck to get a better view, his small hands gripping the balcony railing as he tried to see everything at once. What happened next would become one of the most memorable moments of the entire Platinum Jubilee celebration, though Mike didn't realize it at the time. As the planes roared overhead, Prince Louis began to react in ways that would soon capture the hearts of people around the world and create a viral sensation that would be replayed countless times on social media. The little prince started by covering his ears with his hands, clearly overwhelmed by the noise of the jet engines. But, rather than being frightened, he seemed to find the whole experience thrilling. His facial expressions began to change rapidly, shifting from amazement to concentration to pure joy as he processed the spectacle unfolding above him. Mike found himself watching Louis more than the aircraft, fascinated by the child's unguarded reactions to what was clearly an overwhelming sensory experience. The little boy's responses were so genuine and uninhibited that they provided a refreshing contrast to the more controlled reactions of the adults around him. As the flypast continued, Louis began to experiment with different ways of responding to the noise and excitement. He would cover his ears, then uncover them, then cover them again, as if testing how much of the sound he could handle. His face went through a series of expressions that perfectly captured the experience of a young child encountering something completely outside his normal frame of reference.